Hello crew, it is Wednesday and I just watched your latest video about cooking tenderloin, venison tenderloin. Couldn't remember the word venison there temporarily, I'm not sure why. But you mentioned the Penn State thing and I figured I'd take a preemptive shot at it. It's interesting because obviously I'm disappointed with the whole thing, and I wonder what could have been done to prevent it, and I feel really bad for the kids that are involved. But I'm also really ticked off at the way that the press has reacted and is currently crucifying Joe Paterno, because and you know, I may be completely off base on this when more information comes out and we find out what he knew and when he knew it precisely. If that ever happens, you'll be able to make a better judgment about it. But everyone's just lining up to throw him under the bus, and I think it has to do with the sort of the horrible nature of the entire set of incidences, and I think that people tend to want to blame someone immediately, and especially, you know, with Paterno, who has always been above reproach in almost everything he's done, and I think he's an easy target. But let me explain first of all what bothers me about what everyone's saying. What's known, from what I can understand, everyone talks about how there was so the only thing that Joe Paterno is demonstrably new is that in 2002, a graduate assistant, Mike McQueary, who grew up in State College, saw what he says is he saw Jerry Sandusky sodomizing a 10 to 13-year-old boy in the showers at Penn State. He went to Joe Paterno, but according to Paterno, and also I believe according to McQueary, he didn't tell him the specifics of what he saw. He just basically told him he saw something that he believed was criminal, and Joe Paterno immediately took him to the athletic director and the vice president in charge of administration and finance, who was the head of the police force for the college. And at that point, it's not clear that Paterno did anything else. He just kind of left it. So Paterno's not a target of the investigation because legally that was what he should have done. There's no evidence he knew about any of the other cases, but he didn't follow up on it. Now, what everyone's saying is Joe Paterno should have done something else. So first of all, you know, as someone who is, I mean, Joe Paterno, you know, everybody talks about how Joe Paterno was a god and had ultimate power in State College, and I think that I think that's wrong, first of all. And it's interesting because when we lived in State College, I saw Graham Spanier around town. Actually, I have a photograph of me with Graham Spanier working on an immersive desk where I did a demo for him. But we saw him around town, and at the times that we saw him, we were not impressed with him. He seemed arrogant and entitled. You know, he spoke on the radio. He did a QA thing on the radio at one point, where a wife of a professor called in and said, "Look, you guys are driving my husband to his grave. He's being asked to work ungodly hours. He works really hard, and there's no, you know, the pressure is unbelievable, and he never sees his kids." And Graham Spanier basically said, "That's tough. We're a top-notch organization, and if he can't deal with that, if he doesn't have the skills to deal with that, he needs to leave." You know, which is obviously I disagreed with. But anyway, Spanier struck me as somebody who was arrogant. He was like the CEO of a corporation who didn't really care about anything but the image of the corporation and and getting ahead, sort of. Joe Paterno, on the other hand, did not have that reputation. He was very humble. He was known. He lived in a small house in a neighborhood near the university. Actually, he lived right, on the other side of the main road in the same neighborhood we lived in. He walked around. He ran. He wasn't known for, like we saw Graham Spanier once go to a restaurant where he basically cut in front of the line, the people who were waiting to be seated, and just kind of, took the seat because he took a table because he was Graham Spanier. Paterno was known for not doing that sort of thing. He was very gracious. And Paterno also, I think, thought of himself as just a football coach. I mean, he really did. He didn't think he was particularly special. And, and obviously to get in a position and stay in a position where he was, he had to be driven. He had to be hard on people at times. The guy wasn't a saint by any chance. But I think, honestly, he thought of himself as a football coach. And so, and in the same way, I think of myself, so as putting myself in his shoes. So I am a, administrator in an organization that's, 600 people. My boss is right at the top of that administration. So I'm kind of one level down. And I think of Paterno kind of being in a similar situation where his boss is the athletic director. The athletic director reports directly to the president or to one of the vice presidents. I'm not sure which. But, he's basically in a similar position I am. He's a football coach. Somebody comes to you and says, I think I saw something illegal going on, and it was somebody who's a friend of yours. So I think about this. So what happens if, in my case, one of my computer techs comes to me and says, I saw Eric Quimps doing something, say dealing drugs, let's just say, to another employee or to a kid. I saw him dealing drugs to a kid in the basement of our building. And that's all he tells. That's all I'm told. What would I do in that situation? Well, I'll tell you what I would do. Is first of all, okay, or even better, how about this? Somebody tells me that they saw Rob Quimps, who no longer works for the organization, dealing drugs in the basement of the organization after hours. I would go to my boss and I would say, this employee told me this. You need to deal with this. Because, number one, the person that I am in the organization, I do not have the authority to deal with something of that severity, something that has possible legal implications. Second of all, the person being in question is a friend of mine who I have a long history with. So I should not be involved in an investigation of that. Third, I don't know anything else about it. My first reaction, probably much like Paterno's, would be to not believe that was true. And regardless of whether I believe it or not, by taking it to somebody who's supposed to take it to the police have the authority, the mandate, the expertise, and the responsibility to investigate that and solve it. So I take it to my boss. Her job is to take it within the organization to figure out how to proceed within the organization. It's perfectly reasonable to do that. And at that point, I need to not be involved anymore for all the reasons. First of all, because I have no authority over this person. It's not someone who I have authority with. And second of all, because it's a friend of mine. Now, this is exactly what the situation Paterno would have been in. People talk about he should have tried to find the kid. It's like, how is he supposed to do that? I mean, what is he going to just start calling around? Is he going to go to Jerry Sandusky and say, listen, I'm not going to call somebody who I know, who doesn't work for me, who's been my friend, and say, look, somebody reported to me that you were engaged in criminal activity, and I want to know who you were engaged with. That's, first of all, you're tipping them off if there actually is criminal activity going on. What can you do in that situation? So, I guess you see where I'm going here, is that within an organization like Penn State, it's a huge organization. It has protocols for dealing with situations like this. And just because you're famous and you have lots of power and you're well known and you run a big program doesn't mean you're qualified to run an investigation or to follow up on something like this. So, my feeling is that I look at Joe Paterno and I think what he did was completely reasonable. It's what I would have done. He went to the two people who he should have gone to. He turned it over to them. It was taken to the campus police, which, like Wazoo, it's a police force that should be dealing with this. Now, if it comes out that Paterno knew more specifically what was going on, if he knew that there was sodomy involved, if he believes that what Mike whatever his name is, McQuarrie saw, if he thought it could have been horsing around that was misinterpreted, and he handed off to somebody else to let them take care of it because of all of the reasons, the conflict of interest, the lack of authority, all of that stuff, that's reasonable. And so did he follow up? Maybe he should have asked what happened. But then, if he goes and asks what happened, is that seen as putting pressure? If he goes and says, so what's going on here? Have you, or however he phrases it, is he putting pressure? Is he impeding the investigation? I don't know. It's just not that cut and dried where you can say, well, Joe Paterno should have done something. Well, so what should he have done? And I've yet to hear anyone explain what it is exactly he should have done. Maybe they say he should have gone to the police. Well, if somebody came to me and told me you, Carew, were sodomizing little boys, I am not going to call the police. Especially if I'm in a large organization and there's an investigation going on. With you I would ask you, but it's completely different because you're in an organization, you're protecting the organization. There's all kinds of things. You don't just go and do something by yourself. And I know that people say, well, what about the kid? You have to look for the kid's interest. It's not. Joe Paterno doesn't have the power to take care of that kid. He doesn't have the power. He doesn't have the responsibility. He doesn't have the training to know what to do about this kid. He just didn't know enough to know how to behave. And, it was taken to the people who did have the responsibility to take care of this. So anyway, I just think, but more information may come out that shows that Paterno knew something and should have taken further steps and done something. But until that information comes out, I'm not going to crucify the guy and throw him under the bus. And I think that the entire, the world as a whole should take a step back and rethink the way that they're covering this. Anyway, it's interesting. I wrote a blog post about this. I was so keyed up. So if you go to my danhaug.net, you can read my blog post about it and see what I wrote there. Anyway, interested to hear your take as someone involved in law enforcement in the past. Still dead.